There's a game film students play when they're feeling clever. It's called Count the Homages. You watch a Tarantino film, you mark every reference, the Leone framing, the blaxploitation soundtrack, the Hong Kong action grammar, and by the end you have this list, this inventory of influences, and you feel like you've understood something. But actually, you haven't. You've cataloged the furniture. Because here's what that exercise misses. Every director who tried to copy Tarantino in the 90s had access to the same films he did. They could rent City on Fire, they could study Leone, they could blast soul records over slow-motion walk sequences. Some of them even had budgets. The resulting films were unwatchable. Not bad exactly, just maybe empty. Like walking through a replica of a house and realizing no one lives in it. So either Tarantino is operating on something those imitators couldn't identify, the only explanation that holds, or the thing that makes his films work isn't the references at all. It's something underneath them. Something you can't lift by watching the same movies he watched. What actually drives a Tarantino film? This is the observant cut. We don't ask why a filmmaker is great. We ask how they actually work, what's happening at the structural level that makes everything else possible. In this edition of Dissecting Director, we're breaking down Tarantino's secret method. The engine running his films since 1992, the one his imitators couldn't copy, because it doesn't live in the frame. It lives on the page, before the page becomes a movie. Quentin Tarantino. Palme d'Or, 2 Academy Awards. Self-educated at a video store in Manhattan Beach, which is either the most romantic origin story in cinema or proof that film school is a moderately expensive detour, depending on your perspective. He has announced, with complete sincerity, that he will make exactly 10 films and retire. He's currently on 9. He has been on 9 for a while. The retirement announcement has been made so many times, it has its own fan wiki. He did not study screenwriting. He studied acting. And that distinction, it turns out, explains almost everything.
And the dialogue just comes out of the character. And I don't lead the characters. I let the characters lead me, both as far as who they are and the conversations and even the scenario itself.
Most screenwriters start with a plot, a situation, a sequence of events that need executing. Characters are then constructed to service those events. They exist to make the plot happen. They are essentially plot delivery systems wearing human faces. This is how the majority of Hollywood films work, and it's also why the majority of Hollywood films feel interchangeable underneath their surface differences. Tarantino inverts this completely. Character writing first, plot later. He has described his writing process as one where the characters begin speaking and he writes down what they say. Not metaphorically, functionally. He has said he feels like a fraud for taking credit for the dialogue because from his perspective the characters are producing it and he is merely keeping up. His stated goal is to reach the point where the characters take over entirely and start telling him where to go. By his own admission, he nailed it perfectly on Pulp Fiction. The plot, in this framework, isn't the engine. It's the exhaust. It's what comes out the back of a process that's already running on something else. This is also why, incidentally, his films contain so many shots of feet. The characters told him to do it. He was just writing it down. The feet are a sidebar. The method is the point. 3 films, 3 stages of the same thesis.
Are you gonna put it away?
I'm gonna do whatever the fuck I want with it.
Well, then I'm afraid I'm gonna have to keep it.
Hey, Joe, want me to shoot this guy?
Shit. You shoot me in a dream, you better wake up and apologize.
A heist film with no heist. That is the entire formal argument of Reservoir Dogs, and it is not a joke, it's a proof of concept. Tarantino removes the one event that justifies the genre's existence and asks, does the film still work? The answer is yes, emphatically. And that answer is only possible because the characters are complete before anything has happened. You don't need the heist. You have the people. The diner opening. 8 men around a table, arguing about the ethics of tipping and the subtext of Madonna's Like a Virgin. Nothing about this advances the plot. There is no plot yet. What it does is establish the complete social physics of every relationship in the room before the film has begun its story. You know who defers to whom. You know who performs confidence and who actually has it. You know, without being told, the precise shape of every fault line in the group. The scene advances 0 plot and defines every character in it. When those fault lines become lethal in the warehouse, it doesn't feel like escalation. It feels like inevitability. The ending was in the beginning. You just didn't know to read it yet. There's a detail worth noting. The characters who barely speak in the diner, Mr. Brown, Mr. Blue, are the first to die in the film. The amount of screen time each man gets in the opening scene maps almost exactly onto how long they survive. Tarantino isn't just characterizing, he's forecasting. The whole film is already inside the first scene, compressed. The warehouse standoff that closes the film is pure character collision. These people pointing guns at each other not because the plot requires it, but because of who they are and what they know. Their motivations twisted into a Mexican standoff that reflects, with painful accuracy, the uncertain loyalties the film spent its entire runtime establishing. The plot didn't put them there. They put themselves there. Plot is just the record of what happened.
You're dry enough. Toss them their clothes. Perfect. Perfect. We couldn't have planned this better. You guys look like... What do they look like, Jimmy?
Dorks. They look like a couple of dorks.
Reservoir Dogs prove the method in a compressed space. Pulp Fiction asks what happens if you scale it. The answer, it doesn't just hold, it generates something entirely new. Tarantino has described the impulse as literary. He wanted to do what novelists do, have characters float in and out of separate stories with different weights depending on which story they're inhabiting. That's not a structural trick. That is a character argument. He's saying these people are real enough to support a universe. The plot is just evidence that they exist. The Jackrabbit Slim sequence. Vincent Vega and Mia Wallace sit in a diner built like a shrine to mid-century American pop culture. The set cost $150,000 to construct, and they talk about television pilots, foot massages, Amsterdam, and the nature of uncomfortable silences. Nothing plot-relevant happens. The scene runs over 5 minutes. It is, comfortably, the most memorable sequence in the film. Because you are not watching 2 characters advance a narrative. You are watching 2 people, specifically these 2 people exist together in a room. Mia Wallace is terrifying and fascinating in ways the film never quite makes explicit. Vincent, professionally careful but constitutionally reckless, watches her the way you watch something you know you shouldn't touch but can't stop finding interesting. The tension in the scene comes entirely from who they are, not from anything the plot requires of them. Even the famous foot massage backstory that a man was thrown from a building for touching Mia's feet, which, given the director, lands somewhat differently in retrospect, exists to charge the scene with danger that has nothing to do with events. The non-linear structure only works because of this. Tarantino can show you that Vincent Vega dies in Act 2 and then bring him back for the closing sequence, and instead of feeling like a cheat, it feels like a gift. Because Vincent's presence in a scene was never contingent on his plot function. He was worth watching regardless of when or whether he was alive. Break the timeline around characters this specific and the audience will reconstruct the meaning.
was 5 and he was 6. We rode on horses made of sticks.
Oh, yeah.
He wore black and I wore white. He would always win the fight. Bang, bang, he shot me down. Bang, bang, I hit the ground. Bang, bang, that awful sound. Bang, bang, my baby shot me down.
The final stage of the argument, and the most audacious one, which is saying something for a director who once structured an entire film around a briefcase whose contents he deliberately never revealed. In Kill Bill, Tarantino doesn't just let characters drive the narrative. He lets them determine the visual language, the genre, the aesthetic temperature of every sequence they inhabit. The film changes what kind of film it is depending on who's in the frame. That's a genuinely strange thing to do. It works because the characters are vivid enough to carry not just scenes, but entire aesthetic registers. Each antagonist distinct enough to generate their own world. O-Ren Ishii gets an anime sequence. Not merely because Tarantino wanted anime in his film, though he did, obviously, but because O-Ren's origin, the specific texture of her brutality and her loss, demands a visual language live action can't contain. The stylization isn't decoration. It's a character argument. This person's interior history is too extreme for the film's normal visual register. The anime doesn't decorate O-Ren. It explains her. One aesthetic decision doing more character work than 3 scenes of expository dialogue ever could. Then, Kill Bill Volume 2 does the opposite. Bud gets the opposite register entirely. His showdown with the bride plays out in a sun-bleached trailer lot. All dust and slow-motion finality, scored like a Sergio Leone standoff, because Bud has gone to seed, a washed-up gunslinger doing manual labor in the desert, and the western temperature of the scene is simply what that man's life looks like from the outside. The bride reaches Bill. The confrontation the entire film has been building toward. And what happens? They sit. They talk. For a long time, there is tea. Bill enters playing a wooden flute, unhurried, almost serene, and David Carradine's performance is so loose, so warm, so dangerously charismatic, there's a Cuban cigar calm to him. A storyteller's patience, that you forget for minutes at a stretch you're watching the man who shot a pregnant woman in the head.
This is me and my most masochistic.
Bill, it's your baby.
There is a monologue about Superman, specifically about how Clark Kent is Superman's costume, not the other way around. Bill using a mythology analysis to tell the bride who she fundamentally is and why everything that happened was, on some level, inevitable. His justification and his grief and his love and his cruelty all operating simultaneously in the same breath, delivered with the same unhurried charm he'd used to tell a bedtime story. It's one of the most underrated performances in Tarantino's filmography, precisely because that warmth makes the violence, when it finally comes, feel like a betrayal of the conversation rather than a continuation of it. The violence, when it finally comes, takes seconds. The real climax was the conversation. Plot would have them fighting. Character makes them talk. And the talking is more devastating than any fight could be, because it arrives carrying the full weight of every choice 2 specific people made over the course of 2 films. You can't manufacture that. You can only find it by building the people first. The 90s imitators had the references. They had the structure, the violence, the pop culture saturation, the dialogue rhythms. They built very convincing furniture and put it in empty rooms and then stood back and wondered why no one wanted to stay. What they didn't have was this: the understanding that Tarantino builds people first and then observes what they do. That the plot is not a blueprint he executes, it's a record of what happened when specific people were placed in specific rooms and allowed to be exactly who they are. That the non-linear structures, the extended conversations, the genre subversions all flow downstream from one principle. Characters who are genuinely real will always generate something more interesting than a story you planned. Reservoir Dogs, character as plot source. Remove the heist. The film doesn't notice. Pulp Fiction, character as universe architecture. Break the timeline. The characters hold it together anyway. Kill Bill, character as aesthetic determinant. Each person vivid enough to define the visual register of their own world. Dissecting Director is a series where we get inside the mind of the filmmakers who actually changed something. Not the mythology around them, but the decisions, the patterns, the obsessions they couldn't stop repeating even when they should have. If you want more essays like this, subscribe and leave a like on the video.